Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear, and this is the Generation Loss Mark II. The name Generation Loss is a real thing. It comes from, I guess, a phenomena where if you repeatedly make a copy of a copy of a copy on some imperfect media, it gains some artifacts, it loses some fidelity, there's some change in its timbre, very generally, that is the generation loss. But Generation Loss, the pedal, was originally the brainchild of one Tom Majeski of Cooper Effects. The Chase Bliss produced Mark II we're going to be talking about today is actually the fourth released version of the Generation Loss. There was a V1 and a V2 from Cooper Effects, and in 2019, the Chase Bliss Audio pedal format. I had the first Chase Bliss version, actually. I bought it at release, and right away, I realized I didn't really gel with it. It was some combination of regretting putting that much money up for a pedal, or since I was always pairing it with synthesizers or keyboards, I was convinced I could get enough of my flexibility or my lo-fi-ness from careful programming. But you guys probably know where this story is going to go. The prices on those went up really, really fast. It was clearly that it was going to be limited from the start. I think there was only 500. The Generation Loss had already been hard to get. And when I flipped it, I made a couple $100. And I still really actually do feel bad about that because flipping sucks. And if someone who wants to actually get their hands on them and they can't because somebody needed to make a couple $100, like, I think that's a bummer. But I still did it. At the time, I couldn't resist quick cash, so I feel bad about it, and I feel like this is confessional. I have to tell you guys that I did that. Anyway, it's been 3 years since that. I've grown up, and so has the Generation Loss. I now really, really love the idea of a pedal that handles modulation or filtering in a specific way to achieve a certain feel. Of course, that is the feel of tape or the feel of low fidelity here. And the specifics of how the Generation Loss accomplishes that, especially here in the Mark II, are really, really fascinating to me. I bought this with my own money, 400 big ones, and I haven't had any conversations with Chase Bliss or anybody who works there. And I bought it right away for two reasons. One, kind of to repent for making money on the first Chase Bliss version. I just actively feel bad about that. And I, at this point in my music making or YouTubing, whatever career, I really want to explore the Gen Loss and its promise of instant parameterized nostalgia. Its promise of controlled failure is really, really compelling to me right now. So anyway, there you go. If you are subscribed, appreciate you coming back. If you support me on Patreon, I really do owe you so much. Thank you for that. If you aren't either, stick around and maybe you'll like me enough to do one or the other. Cool? Cool. Let me show you the pedal. Here we are. Okay, first things first, Gen Loss comes with a really great manual. And where did I put it? It's like a little field book. And in the first few sections, it steps through some really, really great ways to learn the pedal. And I immediately got worried about plagiarizing. And I immediately got worried about just stepping through that and not giving my own flavor on it. So I stopped reading it in order and only checked it when I needed to reference. Just because I want this to feel like my experience with this pedal, not your 15th guided tour through the same manual. So boring things first, all of my dip switches are off. And I'm going to change one hidden setting before I do anything. Hidden settings are you hold both switches until they turn green. And then the dry switch lets you decide line level on the left, instrument in the middle, and I think it's high gain on the right. But I'm going to go on to the left for line level because I'm plugging in a line level instrument. And I'm going stereo out of the Juno into a TRS splitter here. A little annoying to have to use these, but I'm used to it by now. And then out of that into the Empress Reverb, which, let me turn this on bypass, and this is the reverb. And I will not have it on to start with, and I'll turn it on when it feels appropriate, okay? Now for the fun stuff, I'm going to turn everything about noon. And then we're going to tweak a little bit from there, but let's just start by listening to the pedal. So this is the bypass signal. I have the Juno on this sound. Here's the Gen Loss. Adding reverb, changing to a bassier model. Turn everything down a little bit. especially the noise. Back to remember what it sounds like. There you go. It changes it really dramatically. And even at somewhat subtle settings, it is a very, very big difference. But let's talk about what we can actually control. I guess to explain it really broadly, we have a bunch of separate lo-fi elements or tape reproduction elements that we can control more or less independently. It might be a control that changes our timbre. It might be a control that adds artifacting. It might be a control that feels more like modulation to you. But my point is, all those different artifacts, all those different elements of low fidelity are separately controllable. So to start with the two I most associate, and their terms you'll probably recognize if you've used any effect with the goal of tape reproduction, are wow and flutter. So let's start with wow. I'm going to put it up at noon. This is without any. As I introduced it, it's random pitch modulation. That's really, really typical of how you'll see effects reproduce the effects of tape. Flutter is very, very fast modulation. And you can hear, especially when I leave it up like that, it's not evenly cyclical, neither is wow. So if I put, let's try that. A little bit of reverb. Bit more thematically appropriate sound. And already this is totally doing a great job. In part because by doing things like filtering and adding pitch modulation of our synthesis, I can make things even more expectantly lo-fi, you know? But just listening to that one note, wow and Flutter is doing a lot of the work that makes you say, oh, this is low fidelity, or oh, this is being reproduced from tape. At least to me, in my ears, that's one of the things that I really, really pick up on. Cool. I think those are easy to understand. Slow, random pitch modulation, fast, random modulation of pitch, and I think a couple other things. Another one that's easy to understand is tape saturation. In the manual, they hint at the theory behind it or the physics behind it, but really just think of it as an overdrive. On synthesizers, cranking, even though I do have this set for line level. Great. There's almost also an element of compression in there, but saturation is, again, something you would sort of expect, especially if you have experience with other effects trying to replicate tape replication. Okay, I'm going to jump down here to the noise switch, and the noise switch lets us turn on 2 levels of noise. I am happy to report that with the hidden functions, you can control the level more precisely. That's currently all the way up. I'm going to turn this noise all the way down. There's also 2 more kinds of noise. If I go to the left here, in the middle is nothing. And if we move to the right, it's hum. So we have hum, hiss and noise. And you can use noise combined with hum or hiss. Great. Introduce WoW and Flutter again. And both of them will turn down with the noise switch. Here they are at half of what I set them at. Great. I think it sounds really, really cool, but it is very annoying to have on when I'm trying to demonstrate, so I'll leave it off. And man, I really, really wish that was just a trim pot. Instead of having a 2-position switch and then having to go in here and set it, and oh no, I set it while I had the knob in half, and I should have set it while the knob was in full. You know what I mean? Ends up being really, really finicky when it could have been a trim pot or an additional knob. Now, the most exciting part of the generation loss to me is failure. And I do need to check the manual to see how they describe the 3 elements of it. There are drops, snags, crinkles, and pops. So I'm just going to play. I'm just going to hold a chord here. We're going to turn up failure. This is, to me, the most convincing, the most impressive part of the generation loss. And that's completely on its own. As soon as we add in a few other elements, and reverb, absolutely, unequivocally adore that. So I'll turn WoW and Flutter back off so we can fixate on, let me find the page here. So drops are playback errors that cause brief moments of silence, which I'm sure you can hear. Snags are abrupt pitch spikes, the result of the tape briefly getting stuck. Crinkles and pop are micro disturbances that produce a shaky, crumbling feeling. And so I know I said earlier, oh, it's a bunch of tape elements that you can control independently. And now I'm telling you that failure controls 3 things, and that are kind of random all at once. But if we look on the back at our much discussed dip switches, we have individual control of drops and snags. We can turn those off if we would like and listen to those things in isolation, which I'm not going to take the time to do. And also available to us in our hidden control section, this is the level of our crinkles and pops, so I'll turn them all the way up. And that crinkle and pop level here, the hidden function over failure, is separate from this noise toggle. I don't know if I would like it to be or not. I think I'm glad that it's not. You can notice them pretty clearly. And also just high failure. I really, really mean it. That is the most impressive part of this pedal, is how convincing this sounds on how much of this really does feel like a failing tape medium. So impressive. It really is so impressive. I do have one minor complaint with failure. You hear those dropouts that go to near total silence? Especially if I turn off the reverb. I really, really wish one of the hidden functions was a maximum reduction or a floor or a depth even, we could just call it, of those dropouts because I want all the other elements. I want the crinkle and pop. I want the snags. And I want the dropouts too, but to drop to total silence is a little bit like, I wish I didn't do that. And sometimes implies a rhythm that you really don't want. I would love if that was included, a sort of maximum reduction. I say all that, but there are a few ways to mitigate that. One, if you have a reverb on after it, especially one with a short pre-delay, chances are you won't notice them as clearly. There were a few, and we have the switch in the middle that lets us add in our dry signal. So here it is halfway, and there it is at unity. So unity is the same volume we're piping into it, and if this is up top, the volume here is at unity, so is the effect sound. And it does work in mitigating those dropouts, because our sound will never go away, but it also adds a chorusing to the wow and flutter because your dry signal is mixed in with a vibrato version. That I really don't necessarily want all the time. In fact, I find the chorusing to be distracting if it's not the only effect I'm going for. Because that, to me, sounds like a lo-fi pedal. That, to me, sounds like a wonky chorus. But again, I talk about the individual elements, and this is totally an aside. If I just use wow, dry signal all the way up, even no saturation, we now have a random chorus. And I didn't mean to compliment the flexibility here, but I will. Or what if I just want a flutter chorus? You know what I mean? We have control of the elements in such a way that we can do things like that. Anyway, that was totally a tangent. I want to, before we leave failure, say again, by and large, that is the most impressive thing about the generation loss to me, the way that failure works, and how convincing, truly convincing, that it does sound. Okay, lastly, the models. And I haven't showed you these yet on purpose because they changed the sound of everything else, and I wanted you to hear everything else in isolation. But the model is an EQ curve based on one of a number of tape machines. And they have a full list in here. They actually list them all twice. So they actually list them all on the knob, and then they list them all with cool visuals. So I'm going to step through a few of them that I want to highlight. First, we're all the way to the left, there's no model, there's no EQ applied. But as we go up one, there's our first one. This is a VHS player. Mostly a loss of our high end. If I click up one more, and another small complaint, I wish there was some visual feedback when I changed models, and I didn't have to be holding down a key and listening. Because you have to count. So I'm on 0, 1, 2. Even just a flash of color, because they attribute different colors to each of the models, or at least each group of models. That would be so helpful in understanding where you are, especially in the middle range. Anyway, we're on the second VHS model, which is a 2-generation signal of the same VHS player. So it's a copy of a copy. There's one, there's two, and the third model is, you guessed it, a 3rd-generation copy of a VHS player again. Mostly a lot of loss of your high end. There are 2 cassette players, Portamax RT and HT. Then a camcorder. Loss of low end, extra highs, I think. That is a loss of low end. I could keep clicking through these. I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom. All the way at 12, we have a reel-to-reel. If I click one back, there's models, I guess signature models, by Amulets. Right there. And then one for blank forms. And those are just changes in EQ. Those, as far as I understand, do not affect the behavior of any of the other settings, which is good. And so now if I turn all these things up, especially failure, and I stay on the blank forms model, the noise also goes through the EQ as applied by the model. Reverb's back. Really great. Really great sounds. And for a lot of the demonstration, I think it's distracting to have things filtered, but in an actual application, especially with something that doesn't have control over its own high-pass and low-pass filters, those models go a really far way as far as selling your sound, making it feel like a complete low-fidelity reproduction of whatever it is. I think, like, what do you call it? Convergent evolution. No matter where I start, these are about the settings I would always end up with. Just below half on Wow, Flutter, Saturate, Failure, probably in the top half, but at least at the halfway point because I love it so much, and then the model consideration of whatever I'm playing with. But I think this is where my brain really wants generation loss to be. No dry signal, and the control's about there. I really could just play simple lines and listen to things like that forever, but I can't, can I? I'm getting a little bit too distracted. Okay, you saw me click it a few times earlier. We have this aux button, or this sort of performance control. We have stop, filter, and fail. So right now we're on stop, and it's a tape stop or a tape start. Really, really powerful. And we can affect how fast it happens with the hidden function on the top left there. And it can go really, really, really slow. Or it can go quite fast. And it is, and the switching is sort of smart, I guess, or contextual. So if I press it once really quickly, it knows it's a toggle. And if I hold down for a second, it knows I only wanted that to be momentary. The other two aux effects, which are also expected by the time, so I'm going to put it up here at noon, we have filter. So if I have a really dramatic model on, and then I change to our aux, it'll smoothly blend between that and the dry. I'm going to speed up the response. You can really hear it. You can really hear the filter in that case. So it's a smooth blend between no filtering and whatever filtering is applied by the model. That's a really cool sound. Is that affected by the length of the change? How long it takes to blend when you just change the knob? It is not. I might like it to be, but again, that's not a common request, I don't think. Anyway, really, really cool. And fail maxes out the parameters you get through failure, and that can sort of be I'm actually going to turn up the response on that because it's sort of random anyway. It's hard to hear. Tons and tons of dropouts. Tons and tons of snags. Not so many. Tons of them. Cool. I think tape stop is the most distinctly audible and probably the one I'm going to use the most. I think especially because I'm playing with my hands on a keyboard most of the time and I'll have this at reach of my hands, I don't see much of a use for the failure one. I'll just turn up the knob if I want. And because it's inconsistent, I wouldn't try and use it as a timed effect to emphasize a moment or a drop or whatever. I can see myself using the filter as well, but primarily if I'm going to be using any of these aux effects, especially with my hands, you'll see me using the stop. Cool. What else we got? Great. That's most all the panel control and a little bit deeper on some of them. I'm going to take us to the dip switches now. So until now, all the dip switches have been in the default position, and you can think of these sort of as a physical submenu. Okay, so instead of having to factory reset through some means, all you need to do is flop all these dip switches to the top. I think it works, but I'm going to turn on just one of them for now. It's called spread. And what spread does is failure is totally unique on your left and your right signal, and that works really well for me with synthesis and synthesizers. And I didn't mention it earlier, but this is another way to help mitigate drops going to complete silence. But I really hope you're listening in stereo. I also still have crinkle and pop all the way up. Crackle and pop. If you'll listen to the difference between your left and right, really, really powerful stereo image. I could just listen to the way that bounces between my left and right for a really, really long time. Because it's everything I love about failure with added stereo interest. Gosh, really, really do enjoy that. There are a few other dip switches on that right side, and I'm referencing the manual to find out. Like we saw earlier, drop, snag, and hum can all be bypassed individually. They have a setting for mono in, stereo out, which is pretty cool. I'm getting into more advanced control, and that's normally where I'd like to talk about MIDI, but I cannot. I have no good way to get MIDI into the generation loss. Again, I'm complaining that TRS MIDI is not a standard. I wish it was, and if it hasn't been until now, we should have a control to change it. I can see no reason why, and this isn't Chase Bliss specifically. I understand where, whatever it was, 5 years ago, and everybody's trying to figure out MIDI, especially on guitar pedals, everybody picked something different. Okay, I'm over that. That's fine. But now, on pedals with complex submenus, why is there not a setting to change the way the TRS input works? Why can't I set all of them to work with a Type A adapter? I only have Type A adapters. And I don't even know that if I had a Type B adapter, it would work with the Chase Bliss pedal, because the pinouts are a little unclear to me. I can see that, as far as I understand the data, quote unquote, would come in on the ring on a Type B jack, and that is what I see described for Chase Bliss TRS MIDI, but I can't test it because I don't have a Type B adapter. The whole left side of our dip switches are about control, and it can be control with an expression pedal or control via automated ramping. I have this Chase Bliss expression roller, which even if you've been on the channel for a long time, you might have seen like once. But I really love it because I'm often using pedals in a way that I have my hands on them. And this is a great way for me to change expression values with my hands. Actually, I'm going to lean forward and grab another one. I have this Old Blood Noise Endeavors expression slider, which works pretty much the same way. You have two outputs on the Chase Bliss expression roller. Anyway, so to set up control of a specific parameter with expression or CV, you need to get your camera in focus. And then I'm using a pair of tweezers to make it easier to hit. But on the left side, I'm going to press in on failure. because that's what I want to control. And then here for, actually I'm going to change polarity as well, but here for sweep, T and B are bottom and top. And so for all the knobs that I have selected, and it can be multiple, but right now I'm just doing failure, you set the bottom, and then you swap your switch to the top, and you set the top. So right now, my expression roller should control the full range of the failure knob. And I'm set to 0 on the pedal and 0 on the roller. And as I turn it up, there it is. Cool. I could do that for any of the knobs. I could do that for multiple of the knobs at once. You can also use this control section for ramping. So I'm going to set it up with bounce. Okay, I probably sped through that, but I just set up ramping, which is an evenly cyclical, by default it's a triangle LFO, pointed to whatever parameter, and I have it set to the model. Pretty cool. I'm sure you can tell, but I didn't say it, but I'm sure you could tell when you're using ramping, the volume control is no longer volume, it's ramping. Considering how I know each of these can be moved smoothly when you trigger this filter aux setting, I would really, really love if that was a smoother blend between all these EQ curves, or if there was a setting to make it a smoother blend between all those different EQ curves. Might be asking too much. I like that a lot. I think it's very useful. I think the dip switches can be a little bit cumbersome. And really, the way I see it, in most cases, you're going to set it up once and attach that to a preset or leave that forever. Actually, you know what? I didn't show you presets. Presets to get to from the pedal are really simple. To the left is a preset. To the right is a preset. In the middle is manual or live. Great. I'm not actually sure how to save a preset. I'm going to look that up right now. To save to the right slot, hold the right foot switch for 3 seconds. Then add the left foot switch for another 3. Did I get that? I did. Okay, so you can save over presets pretty easily. Do the same thing for the left slot, starting holding on the left foot switch. Okay, cool. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I go off it and on it. Cool. That's really easy to manage, and huge credit to Chase Bliss for making that actually doable from the panel as opposed to the and having to buy something external on this 2 Strymon pedals I just showed off. I feel like I'm kind of going through the more advanced stuff, and there's only one more thing I really, really want to hit. There is a way to, this switch here, Classic, brings us into the Generation Loss Mark I, which works totally, totally differently. We have a high-pass filter. We have a low-pass filter. We have like a sample rate reducer. We have wow and flutter. And that isn't just a simpler version of the Mark II stuff. This is a totally, totally different pedal, really. So if I turn off everything, that's like bit crushing. I'm actually going to see if they call it bit crushing or sample rate reduction. And like I said earlier, I really did stop looking at the manual because I was so worried about taking their good explanations. I really want this to be my impression, not just whatever it is not just exactly what everybody else sees when they go through the manual. Sets the sample rate. Okay. Roll counterclockwise to degrade the audio quality. Cool. And wow and Flutter are more or less the same in classic mode here. Wow has no secondary description. Flutter says in classic mode does not include amplitude modulation. Okay. And I think I have spread on. I'm actually going to turn that off. I can't help myself. I'm going to plug the expression pedal into the Control D filter here. Great. I'm going to bring that down and actually going to put it on bounce. Just so everybody knows this is totally a tangent. So if I have that unplugged, then does bounce work? Yes. Okay. Well, now you know if you have an expression pedal in, ramping doesn't do what you thought it did. And I totally will get lost in this because it's a totally new set of controls, but I want to highlight it in that way. I want to show you that the option to swap back to classic mode isn't a simplified or a more rudimentary version of the same thing. It's different controls. The way you interact with a high-pass and a low-pass filter separately is very different from the way you interact with the EQ models. Not having failure is a big loss, but sample rate reduction is a big gain. So there are two very fully featured lo-fi pedals in here. It's very, very impressive. I think if I kept going, and I really could, I could find more things to show you that I like or I think are impressive or little tricks or ways to use generation loss, but I think that's where I'm going to end it. I showed you the way all the controls made sense to me. I showed you some of the more sophisticated control options. And past that, I think you just need to think of what do I want to sound degraded and how do I want it to sound degraded. If you guys remember my episode on texture, almost everything I achieved in that video with really cumbersome physical media, I would be more satisfied. I would be more engaged in getting those sounds with this generation loss. And I think that's generally how I think of myself using it, as ways to sort of sauce up elements for songs or to be in a live environment and have a sort of processing that feels like the thing you'd expect on a totally finished track. I think it's extremely powerful to have options like that in a hands-on thing. Do I think that there's some loss of how genuine it is by doing it this way? Not really. How many people get effects like this in a DAW? I don't think it's less genuine, quote unquote, to get your tape sounds from a digital effect than it is to go through the trouble of doing it with digital, to go through the trouble of doing it with an actual reel-to-reel. Is it cool to do that? Yes. Is there an experimentation angle to that I find very appealing? Yes. And if it's right for the project, or you have the time, or you don't see it as an inconvenience to have to go through all the physical manipulation of the tape, then continue to do that. But if that doesn't make sense for you, or your space, or your budget, or the project, then I see Generation Loss Mark II as an excellent way to those same sort of sounds, as an excellent, immediate, hands-on way to achieve a lot of the same outcomes, a lot of the same final processing results. You can make things sound like it came from a cassette recorder, a dictaphone, a reel-to-reel, just by dialing in a few knobs. And if there's an element on the physical one that would have been annoying, if there's a noise you don't want, if there's a recording limit, little things like that, you don't have to worry about that here. So as a sort of processor, right, to make things feel specific, to make things feel characterful, I don't think there's a better choice right now. I do think the price is a little steep. There were a few things that I would like to see changed. But there you go. That's all I have to say. I think the Generation Loss Mark II is exceptional. It has a lot of hype around it, and I think rightfully so. It is the best way to get these sounds, and it's the most complete suite of controls for a lo-fi pedal of anything I can think of. I don't use a DAW. If you're going to shout at me about RC20 or whatever, it doesn't mean anything to me. This is my bag, and I really, really am happy to have this. Tom Majewski, Generation Loss from the start was really an inspired design, so I'm happy to see it continued in this way, and really the initial idea done justice so completely here. So I'm really happy I have this. Appreciate you guys watching. Hope that was helpful. You should check these out. No affiliate links because they just sell direct now, so I just have to link you to them. You got to take my word for it that I like this shit. I'm not getting any spillover for it. So my name's Jorb. I love gear. Appreciate you watching. Cheers and so long.